Hey, what's up everybody? Video 44 coming at you another video. Alright, so walking back to the hotel, feeling better. I think the air was good for me and my overall morale. Definitely happy that it's cooler, even though it's still relatively warm. It is, it is the valley, so even on days where it's cooler, it ain't as cool as you would like it to be. But yeah, man, I don't know, man. I just feel like we need to all be very careful not to allow separation-inducing propaganda to get us all riled up about things that ultimately they get us all riled up about, All of us are proud of our heritage, or want to be proud of ourselves, want to represent ourselves to the best of our ability. Whatever we think that looks like, some people have it right, some people have it wrong. Who am I to tell you? I don't know. The point is, everybody wants to feel like they're important, and everybody wants to feel like when their voice is used, it is heard, and everybody wants to be respected, have their humanity respected, have their point of views respected. All that is very, very common amongst many, many people. Not everybody loves themselves, but most people want themselves and whatever their respective groups are to be given the treatment that they feel it deserves. Blanketed statement. I think we can all get away with saying that's pretty much the truth, whatever we think that looks like. I think the powers that be definitely understand that. And a lot of times they use that against us. A lot of times it will take our, confidence or desire to be confident, and they will turn it and point it in a certain direction so that we'll be angry at people who aren't us, whatever we are. What my group is. I'm mad at your group because something that they put in my face. I'm mad because I don't feel like you heard me, or whatever the case. I don't feel like you treated me properly, or I feel like I've been silenced, whatever. It's always something that is in place to take that for which is an identity politic or an identity pride and just tilt it in such a way to make us fired up, feel like we're the most important people in the world, or more so, to better word it, like we're not as important as we feel we deserve to be treated. And in these conversations, people can shut one another off let me word myself properly. People can stop listening to one another if the wrong word or phrase is uttered, or if we don't feel like you're respecting us, suddenly I'm not going to listen to anything else you got to say. And I'm guilty of that. 41 years of age, I can admit that I've been heavily propagandized into believing that I need to always fight for my importance, or for my voice to be heard, or for to be treated properly. There's always an interest from within myself to represent my people, or whatever the case may be. It's always going to be there in the presence of this melting pot called America, where everybody's different. Some people are more represented than others, but at the end of the day, I'm me, we're us, and we deserve whatever it is I tell myself or believe we deserve. Fair enough. Especially in the presence of what has been white supremacy, colonizing up the earth, hurting indigenous people. I, as an indigenous person, have a special sensitivity to that mistreatment being pointed at anybody, let alone my own people. My pride, my love for myself and my people makes it so that if you're pointing something at us that I feel even remotely offends, I take offense. And the disconnect that I think I feel to someone who may be colonizer, white supremacist, white person, whatever the phrase would be, though they're very different, for the sake of what is not me, I think the disconnect is that maybe, and this is just my notion, I don't really know, I'm not certain, but it's just I get the feeling that they come from a perspective of having to protect that for which is already established. We come from a perspective of constantly having to fight having things taken from us, having ourselves taken from our land. Whatever indigenous point of view is, it's always something that white supremacy did to you. And from a white supremacist, it's always something that you've done to some people who would make it so that they would be hateful or unhappy with you, or whatever the negative vibe would be. You did something, your ancestors may have done something, if not you, and now you got to protect against the retaliation or the potential retaliation of that for what you did. Right? Like, that's just my notion. I don't know what a white person actually feels inside of them. Everybody's different, etc. That's not the point. Point is trying to wrap my mind around someone else's perspective when they are on the other side of me, the indigenous person, right? You're worried about them coming back, taking what you've taken from them, right? Or you have a certain pride because in your society in your race, maybe, what a notion, not certain. You've been raised to believe that you do whatever you could take. Your ancestors may have did horrible things to get what you have, but it's yours now because of it. And so anybody that tries to take it from you is wrong, or anybody that tries to reestablish that you were wrong for your measures you engaged in to get what you have is an enemy to you, right? And so you got to posture within your pride for yourself and your people against that for which is resentful to you in a way that makes you strong against that for which is vengeful toward you. And with the presence of that, you have to always wonder if those who you did whatever to are going to come back around and do it to you. Or if they're going to come back around and do something in retaliation to that. It's not the same thing. While simultaneously very much understanding that you are in power, for better or for worse, whether you took it by ill-gotten gain or hard work, you have it. The world is established, the American world, the Western world is established to assure that you always strive and thrive above the indigenous. Strive and thrive above everyone else, really. And you got to somehow, within your space of consciousness, find self-love in the presence of people co-signing what you've done and celebrating you for things that you otherwise would not if it were done to you, or condemning you and your people for it. In that environment where you have both of those things coming together, where people are constantly reminding you that you did horrible things to them in order for you to have what you have received, and calling you evil, calling you devil, calling you colonizer, whatever the words would be. You got to take a position on that and still be able to look in the mirror and not just cower to the presence of all of that. In other words, if I want to walk around just regular white person me, I got to step out in the world where this is the dynamic, where even though everything is rigged, so to speak, for me to win, I may not necessarily as an individual benefit from any of it. Or maybe though they may treat black people terrible, I'm still poor because I ain't getting what I'm supposed to have, right? Or maybe your position is the opposite of that. Maybe you are of a 1%. Maybe you have a lot. And now you got to worry about the brokies trying to take it from you. And trying to take from what you have. Hold you and you accountable for things that your ancestors may have did. And they don't relate to this luxury that you have, and you're afraid to give that up. You don't want to know what it looks like when you don't have luxury, because you see enough from poverty to know that you don't desire it. You've enjoyed luxury enough to know that you don't desire to lose it. And furthermore, you were raised in a space where you only respect those who have a lot in a lot of cases. Your family has a lot, and you appreciate that respect that's pointed at that. You appreciate that you don't have to worry about catching the bus, or roaches in your house, or having to wonder where your next paycheck's coming from, or any of those things that poor people have to deal with. You don't want to deal with that. You fear it. You think it's beneath you, and furthermore, to remain above it, you got to stay in a position of wealth and prestige. But just the same, you got to wonder if you're going to be able to maintain it, if someone's going to try to take it from you. You got to protect against that. Not wonder, but be certain that in certain places you can't go, because if you do, you become food to the poor. It's a lot of different perspectives I don't share that I try to fathom, try to put myself in, so I can, if nothing else, just wrap my mind around somebody else's position as I live through my own. And as I continue to go forward in this life, and I'm seeing all this stuff that's going on in 2025 with genocide and all this stuff that's happening in America and all these different things, the position I take as a person of indigenous blood is that it's evil to do to people what white supremacy has done to the indigenous people. That is unfair, that is lacking in dignity and respect, honor, that is corrupt and untrustworthy and of the devil. And it's easy for me to write off anybody, anyone that aligns with any of its principles as someone who lacks goodness in their personality, in their heart, or what have you, however you define that in your way. That these are just, in fact, bad people. That their perspectives only matter but as much as to steer clear of the traps that ultimately they set in place for me to fall into. And their perspective may be that of, there is somebody who don't have as much, who didn't do as much to get as much as I have, and wants nothing more than to see me lose it all, just because they weren't able within themselves or able within their groups to establish what my ancestors did and what they were willing to do. Just because you were too good, quote unquote, to do it, you are jealous of me for being able to benefit from those who were willing to and capable of, for which you are not. That's what I imagine they say as they look at me. But what I think becomes really dangerous is people not being able to take proper positions for lack of understanding of history. That's what I think becomes unfair. When I don't know, when they don't know what happened, but we all try to position ourselves in a space of confidence for which to move in our positions. They don't know how their family got what they have. I don't know that my people were slaves and indigenous and what happened to the indigenous people. I'm just walking around, living for today, learning everything that has to do with today without actually knowing what the history tells me about myself, and without them knowing on the other end of that what the history actually tells them about themselves. I think we do ourselves no favors when we ignore or suppress the history of who we are and what we've done or what we went through or what was done to us or what have you. Regardless of what position you take, whether you're a colonizer or an indigenous person, it does you no favors to not know how you got to where you are, so that you could take the position that best represents who you want to be and not be surprised when people who do know look at you differently for what is done without your knowledge. I want to tell America, specifically America, because this is where we really establish that history may or may not be necessary, that you are robbing all of us, of the identity and the proper perspectives on our positions. When you try to remove the history from our midst. That's what I'm trying to say. When you take the books away from us, and when you suppress the truth about where we come from or what it is we did or whatever position we take, when you suppress the truth, you take away our ability to properly identify who we are, what position we want to take in this world, and ultimately what our rights are as it pertains to us feeling entitled to or due for or any of those different positions that people ultimately take in the society. And we need to guard against discarding of the history. Because when you deal with other nations, they don't have that problem. Especially older nations like China, parts of Asia. They have their records. They know who they are. They can trace themselves back to the 9th century, 8th century. They know who they are. They know exactly where they come from. They know exactly what came about in order for them to be here. They know of all the stories and the history and the lessons learned, mistakes that were ultimately made by ancestors that have since been long forgotten in our society. They can harken back to their records and know exactly who they are, dating all the way back. It's much further than any of us can. Keeping records going forward gives our children and our lineage ahead a notion of who they are. And I think it's so important for the positions that people take, for the decisions that people make, for them to have some sense of that history. The truth will suffice because it gives us a proper position from which to take on our lives. Because no matter what, in the society I'm in the era we're in, there are people who know the history. And they're holding people who don't know the history to task for certain things that they are unaware of in a lot of cases. Or they're expecting a certain position to be taken, or at least a certain knowledge to be had about things that need to be known in this society. And those people are robbed of that because they don't know the history. Trying to explain to someone white why I would not want them to say the N-word. Trying to explain to someone black why it's so important that they respect their ancestors were slaves and to still find confidence that they don't have to suffer that same fate. They don't have to continue to move in a direction for which they have to submit to white people, or submit to Jewish people, or submit to any damn body because you're a black person in this society and we've earned our freedom. We've thrived under freedom. And that freedom is something that we should continue to strive to maintain no matter what. And so not to sell it, not to give it away. These are strong positions from which to take that a lot of people, if the history never comes their way, will never even know. And I tell you the truth, man. I really am thankful that I know the history. I'm thankful that something called Roots was in place when I was a child to give me an understanding of the slave trade and just how ugly it was, or at least how potentially ugly it was. I'm thankful that I actually am aware of that, because there's some people walking around who don't really know what happened. And there are other people who don't want you to know what happened. And I think that's unfair. Stories that need to be told. People love, laugh, learn lessons, etc. Established ways of healing themselves and an identity and culture about themselves that should not be lost just because there are entities in place that want to keep their history from us, keep their history from us for their own selfish reasons. And I think we should tell the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the inappropriate about what took place so as to give people their proper position in this place, on themselves, on others, on what they should take, on what stances they should take, what they should not, what works, what doesn't, what garners what they expect they'll get, and what doesn't yield them those results. Why they should feel the way they feel, why they shouldn't, if they choose whatever feeling they choose. It's the history that'll help them understand what's appropriate for them. It's a lack of history that'll have them mistaken in the presence of those who understand that history. This is something that I feel is very important, man. So that's what I wanted to say in this video, because I'm watching a lot of people advocate for the erasing of history, saying that we don't need to teach black history, we don't need to teach slavery, we don't need to do this because it creates a divide. I don't believe that those people care that we're divided. I think they just care that people don't know the history, so that they can't properly take the positions necessary from which to defend themselves from things that have already occurred from happening again. For which I think a lot of people who want to remove the history ultimately want to give light to or recreate in modern times. From their positions of strength and domination. Not only over indigenous people, but over their own. That's what I truly believe, man. Let's respect the history that our ancestors engaged in, whether good, bad, ugly, or inappropriate. Let's respect that history. Let's tell these stories. Let's allow people their rightful positions on themselves and on their world around them. Let people know why certain things should be respected, or what happens when they don't respect those things. The history will help them understand that. Because I think people are trying to force us into making the same mistakes that we've already learned from. It's because they want the desired result that comes from that. They want to see the world burn, so to speak. And I quite honestly don't think that's what's best for us at all, to say the least. They want people to walk around disrespecting one another without actually knowing that disrespect has already been learned from. You understand what I'm saying? And that's my point of view on things, man. Whether you colonizer or indigenous, you should know what happened that led up to the moment you in. BDF 44, I thank you all for watching. I'm out.